Hi everybody, welcome to the Blue Moon watercolor tutorial. Please subscribe if you like this video. There's lots more to learn.
Okay, let's move on. Now if you look at the reference photo, there's actually quite a few colors in that blue moon. The full blue moon. We've got a bluish tinge near the moon, these beautiful oranges. There's even some violets and darks, even browns in there. So we're going to try and get that down and in a very loose fashion. So I'm first taking my clean water. I actually have two of these. One to keep clean and one is a rinse for my brushes. So the first thing I really want to do is get my kind of bluish tint in the background, and there's different colors you can use for this. This is phthalo blue. You can see that there. I'm working on a china plate, by the way, rather than plastic. This is the cobalt blue, and you can notice a difference right off the bat. Okay, very, very different colors. Okay, in this case, let's go for broke and use a combination of both. Okay, so we're going to get a pool of that ready to go. And then you just squeeze out the brush because you're wasting a lot of paint if you don't. Alright, so I've got my blue. Again, I'm using gravity to keep it there. Okay, so now I'm rinsing out that brush fairly well, but now you see I'm going to add some violet. And there we go, beautiful violet. We're not going to need a lot of that, so we'll keep that much. Paper towels to the side are handy. Okay, so this water, as you can see, has now been just tinted slightly. And what I'm going to do further to that is I'm going to just take a little bit of the blue with a bunch of water. And here we go. Let's layer down on the paper. I don't know if you can see that running down the page, but there's that gravity working for me. As I come in with those blues, you can see that that's just gorgeous. You know, it's just a very, very, very nice shades there. Okay, so now let's get a little bit of that violet. Isn't that gorgeous, the way that runs together? Like, you know, watercolor's excellent because I'm not sitting here with a brush being all finicky. This is doing this by itself. Look at that, how that's blending together. Okay, so let's keep that violet going. And let's just run that right to the bottom. Now I know that my page is uniformly wet. Everything has been affected by that water. Now, the other useful thing behind this flooding brush is once you squeeze out the water and get the dampness out of it, do you see those lighter areas in the sky? Well, I want to remove some of those. So I'm going with my brush and just mopping up some of that stuff. I'm trying to keep it in the same pattern as the light in the picture. And you can get crazy with this. You can see I'm adding texture as I go. And these are the little happy accidents of watercolor that I love so much. So when you're lifting with your brush, you can get those very, very subtle effects. One of my standbys, my favorite things, is good old TP. You grab a bit of toilet paper, you crunch it up in a nice little pad, right? Now I'm going to come in closer to that moon again. I want a little bit of light coming off that moon, so I'm going to go around it, just like that. Some of those clouds around the moon. I'm holding the paper in one spot. That way it leaves a more definite impression. And sometimes you get these weird shapes, which is great for clouds and things. So let's just keep going with that. see there, it's starting to kind of work. Now by the violet, I want to add some of that gold because, as you probably know, that's a complementary color. Okay. Now I'm not going to add that yellow quite yet. While that page is still damp, I'm going to take some ivory black and some of that violet. Get myself a nice deep tone. And you're going to see this is going to get quite dramatic. So I'm coming in across the top. All sploochy, no big deal, right? Bring that down. I'm letting it run on the gravity of the paper still. Let's get some blue into that. Very loose, very loose. Okay, let's not let that edge settle. What I mean by that is this edge in here. I'm going to rinse out my brush a bit, just so I can get around that moon slightly and take away some of that. Trying to keep that idea that the moon is radiating light. So I'm patting in around there, trying to keep that moon and the colors inside that area clean. Now we got some nice, beautiful, dramatic stuff coming up front here. And, you know, that's okay. Just come in, just like the clouds really look. I mean, you know, and I'm adding blue and violet as I go. You can see that top piece running down. It's getting ahead of me. That's okay. We're gonna blend that in. And the colors now are starting to meld together. So let's get this other part maybe a bit more dramatic. Let's try and get some of this cloud down here. And okay, so you can see around that moon, I've got a little bit of scrub out to do. In other words, I'm removing that edge. Very handy. This flood brush does so many things, really. Okay, it's where I want it. I'm going to flatten my border. I'm going to slightly adjust these splooches because I don't want puddles. And I don't want these colors too uniform either. So there we go. We're going to call that I was going to call that my first layer. Okay. Now you see that purple stuff up there. Kind of leads into the blue. Now I'm just going to tilt that and let those colors run a bit. They're where I want them. That's kind of fine. A little bit damp here. So I'm picking up some of that dampness. I don't want, if you leave puddles of color, you get rings. Some people call it cauliflower. So here we go. Alright, so we're going to be happy with that. We're going to let that dry. We're back. The paper's now dry. I'm going to go in for a second layer. As you can see, let's look back at the reference photo. It's quite dark. Other colors coming through. So these will hopefully be those colors that come through. Let's get in there with some orange and some lighter colors near the moon before we lay in the darker colors. So I've used my second water for my cleaner, what I call cleaner colors. And I've got like an orange mixed up here. But what I want to do here is use the bleeding power of watercolors. I want that to work for me here. So I'm grabbing some of the yellow, a little bit of water, because I don't want it too intense. I'm also getting my trusty toilet paper ready. And where are all the yellows? Well, they seem to be kind of in here, down here. Getting that in. It's a burst down here. I'm getting the yellow in first because I want to go over top of that with a bit of orange. Now the trick is to blend this a little bit nicer. All those incidental colors coming out now are quite nice. I'm just brushing that out. Clean water near the moon here. Brushing that out. Dampening part of the paper as I go. Okay, so there we go. Let's add some orange in there while it's still damp. And now I'm getting that bleeding property of the watercolor. I know it looks dark here. That will lighten up once it dries. Watercolor always looks darker. Always looks darker. Before it dries. Okay, so you can see I'm being very abstract here. I'm really not doing the realistic thing. I'm really going for expressions of colors that I see there, and I'm trying to capitalize on that. But I think what we need again is some dramatic darks. So I've mixed up some ivory black, phthalo blue, a nice deep rich kind of blue. I'm going to use the tilt of the board again to help me on this one. And I'm going to come in with big shapes like this. Slightly overlapping where I just went. You can see that that is still damp, and guess what? Those colors are just blending together like on their own. I'm not even really blending here. This is just the beauty of watercolor. Alright, let's get that other dark areas in for layer number 2. Alright, so now there's some nice dark colors coming in here. I'm going to squeeze that right onto the page. Look at that. You can see when I layer it over top of something like this, it does get darker. And this is part of the principle that we're going for here. I'm kind of going all the way around that moon. Just trying to keep that edge soft as it does in nature. I'm using some of these pools almost as like a reservoir, getting them out to the edge of the page. Again, I'm going to come in. This is really important, this part. The cleanup edge, these edges here. You can see there I'm taking my brush and lifting as I go. It creates beautiful edges instead of hard edges like that. Okay, back to it. It's nice and dry now, and these little breaks are important. They give you time to, for example, check out your reference photo. I was just doing that, and I realized that there's this kind of beautiful golden color behind those clouds, or behind the clouds around the moon, and it almost looks, like a heart around the moon. So I'm going to go for a bit more of that. Okay, so there is coat number 2. We're going to let that one dry. I'll be back shortly. And have it look like it's billowing up into here. Because it is in the photo. So let's smoosh that around. Not too intense. Okay, now I've got a pre-mixed batch here of nice dark colors. Let's look at our reference. Okay. It's running a bit too quick for me, so I'm gonna lower that down. I'm flooding these colors in. You might say, Neil, what do you do? Okay. So now that I've flooded those in like that, it's time for a little bit of removal. Especially around the moon itself, that blue moon. And I'm taking some of this back, because this really is just to tint the whole thing. You can see now it's very malleable, and I can move it around, is what I'm trying to say. But I don't want puddles. I don't want rings. So I'm going very, just to try and lift bits where it doesn't need to be. Okay. Okay, that's not bad. Little insurance around my sun, or my moon, I should say. I do not want harsh lines in there. Oh, here's the other little bonus. Let's do some wispies. I'm holding this Kleenex firmly down, and I'm looking for a wrinkle pattern in it. I'll show you up here. If I hold it one spot long, it leaves a fairly good rendition of the wrinkles that were now in that paper, but they also look like edges of clouds, right? And so have fun with this. I mean, this is yeah. Okay. I don't want to fuss with it too much, but when you stand back and look at it, it just looks more real, the more kind of tonal and random that this is. Okay, you can see how that's really working nice for the cloud thing. Okay, we're going to let that dry now. Let's let that go, and I'll see you in a couple minutes. Okay, I just cleaned up my brush a bit there. So now what I'm thinking is, this is kind of dark. Let's scrub some of that out of there. For that, I'm just wetting my brush, squeezing out the excess. And I'm just kind of trying to get around the edge of that moon. Trying to lift some of that color so that the moon ends up being a glow. Just take your time with this part. It can take a while. But what I'm really doing is just using the brush with water, squeezing it off, and trying to manipulate these areas that are just a bit too dark for my liking. More water, squeeze. I don't want to remove all of it. This is the tricky part. You want to leave some of that in there.
Well, everyone, I hope you learned something from the watercolor tutorial of the Blue Moon. This original and prints will be available. If you're interested, you can check in the links below. See you tomorrow.